The fake news Russia collusion narrative has been running rampant in certain circles of Western media and politics for nearly 2 years now. And despite all the efforts of the establishment media and an investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller, the case remains unresolved. Alas, it would appear that the crack team, or rather crackpots at BuzzFeed News, have solved the mystery. The key appears to be a small, landlocked island nation off the coast of the Mediterranean known as Macedonia. Ever since the signing of the Tsipras-Zaev deal, intended to change the name of the Republic of Macedonia to Republic of Northern Macedonia in early June, the Central Balkan state has been featured in news far more frequently than its minuscule size warrants. If the deal goes through, it will no doubt be a major feat of diplomatic prowess, as it will end a quarter-century-long dispute that has, among other things, been an obstacle for Macedonia's entry into the EU and NATO. The supporters of the deal, mostly limited to Macedonian and Greek government officials and their media allies, as well as European Commission bureaucrats who stand to win accolades for accomplishing the seemingly impossible, have touted the deal as tantamount to Macedonian entry into the two Western alliances. In reality, however, the deal, should it go through, and it is yet to be ratified by the Macedonian president, and it requires further approval by a public referendum, would only lift the Greek veto on accession talks for the tiny republic. Conditions relating to the rule of law, voter intimidation, political patronage networks, violent protests, and problems with judicial impartiality and due process would still need to be met by Northern Macedonia in order for it to be accepted in the company of some of the world's wealthiest and most advanced nations. And that's to presume that none of the current member states would object to Northern Macedonia's accession based on any number of reasons. The timing of the Tsipras-Zaev deal could not have been more awkward or suspicious, depending on your point of view, given the upheaval caused in the EU by dissident leaders opposing the open borders policy of the progressive establishment, and in NATO by President Trump's rhetoric questioning the wisdom of the existence of the alliance in the post-Cold War era, as well as his demands for members to pay their fair share. For those of us deeply familiar with Macedonian politics and history, the deal is all the more suspicious given that it was signed by a leader of the Social Democratic Union, the rebranded Communist Union of Macedonia, the party that played both sides of the Cold War and kept playing the same game long after the demise of the Soviet Union. But otherwise, those of us who have been the voices of dissent in Macedonia, the real pro-Westerners, doubt the sincerity of Prime Minister Zaev's claims that he is concluding a deal that's set to overhaul the Macedonian identity for the third time in a century, simply out of his desire to see Macedonia become part of the alliance that his party so vehemently shunned for 3/4 of a century. We are likewise suspect of the Western media that has taken interest in our former homeland, as we can't help but notice that it, the media, is using Macedonia as a prop in their Russia-Trump collusion narrative. To be sure, Macedonia first began appearing in American media shortly after the 2016 presidential election, as yellow journalism sites like BuzzFeed and The Guardian claim to have discovered that an inordinate number of fake news sites had originated from a mid-sized town in the heart of Macedonia called Veles. In December 2016, NBC News, in a story titled "Fake News: How a Partying Macedonian Teen Earns Thousands Publishing Lies," reported on Dimitri, a teenager from Veles, who had allegedly struck gold by duping slack-jawed, gullible yokels from flyover states into clicking on his bogus news links. The story goes, Dimitri, who asked NBC News not to use his real name, is one of a dozen teenagers in the Macedonian town of Veles who got rich during the U.S. presidential election, producing fake news for millions on social media. The articles, sensationalist and often baseless, were posted to Facebook, drawing in armies of readers and earning fake news writers money from penny-per-click advertising. Dmitry says he earned at least $60,000 in the past 6 months, far outstripping his parents' income and transforming his prospects in a town where the average annual wage is $4,800. He is one of the more successful fake news publishers in the area. His main source of cash? Supporters of America's president-elect. Nothing can beat Trump supporters when it comes to social media engagement. So that's why we stick to Trump. The article then masterfully draws a parallel between the town of Veles and the American Rust Belt that proved crucial to candidate Trump's electoral victory. Dmitry's sole aim, says the NBC article, is to make his stories go viral. His most popular headlines during the election included, "Just in, Obama illegally transferred DOJ money to Clinton campaign," and "Breaking, Obama confirms refusal to leave White House, he will stay in power." The small, Rust Belt town of Veles has found itself in the international spotlight after investigations by BuzzFeed and The Guardian traced more than 100 fake news domain names here. The fake news bonanza couldn't have come against a more jarring backdrop. Once a part of communist Yugoslavia, the Republic of Macedonia has a population of 2.1 million in a landlocked area about the size of Vermont. Blanketed by rugged mountains, parts of the country have enjoyed a tourism surge in recent years. But vacationers won't find Veles in many travel guides. The town of 50,000 is almost an hour's drive down a lonely, crumbling highway from the capital Skopje. Visitors are greeted by a distressed mosaic of red-roofed buildings densely stacked onto a steep mountainside. Industrial smokestacks add to the wintry fog settling over the valley, though even their output has diminished after several recent factory closures. Almost a quarter of Macedonians are currently unemployed, a rate around 5 times higher than that in the U.S. But the burdens that weigh on Veles might also explain why it's become a global hotbed for fake news. High unemployment in a close-knit community meant that when Dmitry and others started making money, word quickly spread and everyone wanted a piece of the action. At the time, NBC News wrote off Veles fake news operations as nothing more than entrepreneurial opportunism driven by economic hardship. The same month as NBC published its story on Dmitry, Macedonia held a hotly contested election that, after months of wrangling and creative politicking, to put it mildly, produced the first change of government in about 11 years. Out went the quasi-nationalist VMRO DPMNE, which, under the leadership of Nikola Gruevski, began showing signs of reluctance to join the West. In came the decidedly anti-nationalist, traditionally anti-Western Social Democratic Union. The SDSM, under the leadership of Zoran Zaev, had run on the promise that it would finally bring Macedonia into the EU and NATO. Now, perhaps because it was aware that entry into these two organizations would require a prior change of name, the Macedonian electorate was reluctant to hand the reins of power over to Zaev, despite its misgivings about Gruevski. Perhaps the fact that Zaev and the Social Democratic Union are just a rebranded version of the Communist Party also had something to do with it. This is perhaps why the overwhelming majority of the ethnic Macedonian vote, as usual, went to VMRO-DPMNE. Early in June, Prime Minister Zaev and Tsipras announced that they had reached a deal on the name Republic of Northern Macedonia. The Macedonian president, Georgi Ivanov, the person constitutionally authorized to conclude agreements relating to foreign affairs, international alliances, and state attributes, immediately voiced his disagreement with the deal. Shortly after, protests erupted in both Macedonia and Greece. If opinions on social media, high turnouts to protests, countered with abysmal turnouts to the government-organized celebrations for the deal, and polls are to be trusted, the deal is dead in the water. The vast majority of the Macedonian public, with over 3/4 of ethnic Macedonians, is against the deal, which perhaps explains what follows. On July 11, 2018, Reuters reported that Greece, which did not join most NATO allies in March in withdrawing diplomats from Moscow over the poisoning of a former Russian spy in England, was about to expel 2 Russian diplomats due to their efforts to obstructively meddle in the Macedonia name change ordeal. According to Reuters, Greece will expel 2 Russian diplomats suspected of meddling in the politically sensitive issue of Macedonia, a Greek diplomatic source said on Wednesday as NATO prepares to invite the former Yugoslav Republic to join the alliance. Macedonia is expecting an invitation at the NATO summit in Brussels this week to join following its landmark deal with Greece, whereby it will change its name to Republic of North Macedonia. Moscow strongly opposes NATO expansion. The Greek diplomatic source told Reuters Athens would expel 2 diplomats and bar 2 other Russians from entering the country due to concerns that they were involved in rallies in Greece against the deal with Macedonia and that they had attempted to offer money to Greek state officials. Greece and Macedonia have both seen many protest rallies against the name accord, particularly in the run-up to the signing of the accord by their prime ministers on June 17th. Moscow regards NATO enlargement as a direct threat to its own security. Many countries that were once in Moscow's orbit have joined NATO and the European Union since the fall of communism in 1989. Now, Yugoslavia and Macedonia weren't fully a part of the Moscow orbit. They were only 50% in the Soviet orbit and 50% in the NATO orbit. So Yugoslavia, that is Macedonia currently, is a part of that sphere that is still up for play. The week that followed the Reuters article will need to be commemorated in the annals of Macedonian history, as not 1 but 2 separate articles featuring Macedonia appeared on the BuzzFeed News website. The first one, from July 16th, featured an interview with Prime Minister Zoran Zaev, where he intimated that his government had received multiple reports that Greek businessmen, who are sympathetic to the Russian cause, paid Macedonians amounts ranging from $13,000 to $21,000 to commit acts of violence ahead of a crucial referendum later this year that will determine whether the Balkan state will be able to join NATO. But, says BuzzFeed, that turned out to only be part of a much bigger effort that allegedly saw hundreds of thousands of dollars distributed to Macedonian politicians, nationalist organizations, and soccer hooligans to derail the vote. The Prime Minister is not quoted specifying which acts of violence were committed by the Russo-Greek agents of chaos. The article, written by J. Lester Fetter, opens by informing the reader that Macedonian officials report having uncovered an alleged massive scheme run by Russian-Greek businessmen to incite violence ahead of a referendum that would allow the country to join NATO. Investigators have gathered evidence that a former Russian politician named Ivan Savidis, who is now one of the world's richest men, has distributed more than $350,000 to derail a key referendum later this year. This, according to Interior Ministry documents reviewed by BuzzFeed news reporting partners, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Report, and Investigative Reporting Lab Macedonia. It is important to note that the Organized Crime and Corruption Report Project and Investigative Reporting Lab Macedonia are Soros-funded operations. It is also worthwhile mentioning that Macedonia has been a home for the Hungarian-born billionaire meddler since the early 1990s, that is, immediately since its independence. As a result, there is hardly a journalist in Macedonia who has not at one point or another received money or training from the Soros Open Society. It is likewise worth to mention that Prime Minister Zaev's party has throughout this entire time had a symbiotic relationship with the Soros Open Society. Members of its executive have, over the years, filed through the Open Society's revolving door, a relationship enjoyed by no other ethnic Macedonian party in the country. Likewise, it is of no small consequence to mention that it was Soros Open Society that blocked the Lustration Act, a law intended to purge the Macedonian society of the remnants of the communist regime back in 2009, and that Mr. Zaev got a hold of the reins of power last year following a nearly 2-year-long multicolored revolution, which was jointly conducted by the SDSM and the Open Society. Furthermore, as the son of someone who was the target of a Macedonian Interior Ministry investigation throughout the 1990s, and who has had a chance to study the documents related to the investigation, I have come to understand that the Interior Ministry of Macedonia has a particular talent for connecting those who don't act in accordance with the politically correct orthodoxy of the time to the Russian agent network. Namely, even though my father donated large amounts of money to the pro-Western, pro-free market VMRO DPMNE, and lobbied politicians to introduce Western-style policies and form alliances with Western countries, the Interior Ministry managed to concoct an allegation that he, my father, was working for Russian interests through a secret connection to the Bulgarian intelligence agency. The quote-unquote evidence that my father was a Bulgaro-Russian spy was based on an alleged statement that someone at a party told an Interior Ministry informant that the Bulgarian government would give unspecified preference to Macedonian companies friendly to the VMRO DPMNE. Since my father was friendly to that party, and he did business, among other places, with private companies from Bulgaria, he was thus treated as a Bulgarian agent intent on violently overthrowing the constitutional order of the Republic. Thus, the claim that the Interior Ministry has gathered evidence concerning a former Russian politician of Greek extract who now owns half of Greece's second city, commissioning acts of violence intended to railroad a deal signed by Social Democrat Prime Minister Zoran Zaev and his Greek counterpart, is as credible as the Steele dossier. Feather then tells us that the Interior Ministry documents showed that some of the payments were made in cash carried across the Greek border, as well as transfers that may be easier to trace. A soccer hooligan involved in violent demonstrations against the deal in June confirmed to the investigative reporting lab that he had received payments. Feather then introduces us to the Russian-Greek businessman in question. Savidis is a citizen of Russia and Greece who first made his fortune owning Russia's state tobacco company, but he has since become a major force in northern Greece. He owns PAOK FC, the soccer team in the city of Thessaloniki, several Greek media outlets, and is part owner of the city's port. Savidis is reportedly close to Russian President Vladimir Putin and has also been honored by the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church. Savidis most recently made international headlines when he rushed onto the field during a game wearing a gun in a shoulder holster. When asked to comment, Savidis did not respond directly to requests for comment from a BuzzFeed news reporter, but his company released a statement to Greek media after this article was first published that said, "We make it absolutely clear that businessman Ivan Savidis has nothing to do with the allegations of this totally false and highly slanderous report. That is why, in the next few hours, we are making use of all legal resources available to us. We will file a lawsuit against the medium and the authors of this unsubstantiated report." As of the making of this video, no news has come out as to the status of this lawsuit. It would, however, appear that the BuzzFeed sleuth missed one tiny detail. In his expose of Ivan Savidis, in his coverage of the new Greek oligarchy published on January 5, 2018, the American interests Alexander Clapp notes, Savidis is something else. To agnosto prosopo, the unknown face. A decade ago, no one in Greece had heard his name. He owns no ships. He made his fortune outside of Greece and is now investing it within the country at an unthinkably inauspicious time. He is politically obtuse. He makes no attempt to ingratiate himself with, and indeed has provoked a feud with, the leadership of New Democracy, the party that many expect will come to power in Greece within the next year. Savidis has become the loyal instrument of a far-left government that climbed to power on promises that would rein in such figures, but which has instead given them renewed license to flourish. For Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, that's the same Mr. Tsipras who signed the deal with Zaev, Savidis is known as Imeteroi, one of our own. a figurehead of a vast capital a new government can use to outsource control of different sectors of the sprawling Greek state. In interviews, Savvidis has compared Tsipras favorably to Putin. He has warned Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the leader of the New Democracy and Tsipras' political adversary, that he will never become prime minister. Now, one is left to wonder, why would someone who is considered by the socialist Prime Minister Tsipras, who, as we mentioned, is one of the authors of the Macedonia name change deal, as one of our own, why would he be working to derail the very same deal authored and promoted by the very same Prime Minister? If the Macedonian Interior Ministry's claims are true, and Mr. Savvidis is indeed behind the nefarious campaign to derail the upcoming referendum in Macedonia, then it would stand to reason that the Greek side went in this agreement in bad faith. If the denial issued on behalf of Mr. Savvidis is true, however, it would suggest that the Macedonian government is looking for a scapegoat for the upcoming referendum's failure. Or it could be both. On the one hand, the Tsipras-Zaev deal is genuinely unpopular with the Macedonian people, and it is bound to be defeated in the upcoming referendum, most likely by way of boycott. On the other hand, the Macedonian ruling oligarchy is a client of Serbia, and Serbia and Greece are traditional allies who, after the Balkan Wars and World War I, walked away with 90% of the territory historically known as Macedonia. Greece still has its part of the loot, while Serbia has temporarily lost its share with Macedonia's declaration of independence in 1991. It has always been my opinion that the name dispute with Greece was just a diversion from Macedonia's actual deficiencies that have to do with the rule of law or lack thereof, systemic corruption, and a lack of genuine liberties. The dispute was really just a tool intended to pressure Macedonia back into the arms of Belgrade. Thus, I can see how the Tsipras-Zaev deal was actually made in bad faith on both sides, with the objective of scaring the Macedonian people into a renewed union with Serbia, under the auspices that under such an arrangement they would be able to maintain their present identity. For the time being, however, it would appear that the BuzzFeed interview with Zaev has the more immediate goal of pointing out the scapegoats for the failure of the upcoming referendum. The second article that featured Macedonia in that third week of July causes me to lean this way. It was BuzzFeed News that on November 3rd, 2016, broke the story of how teens in the Balkans are duping Trump supporters with fake news. It was a story written by BuzzFeed founding editor for Canada, Craig Silverman, and contributor Lawrence Alexander. So you know it was a big deal. The title says so much that it hardly warrants any great analysis of the text itself, and it's basically the same article that was published in NBC News and that we covered earlier. So I won't bore you with it. Here, I would like to focus on the follow-up that BuzzFeed did on July 18th, 2018, titled, American Conservatives Played a Secret Role in the Macedonian Fake News Boom Ahead of 2016. Filed under the heading The Macedonia Connection, the article, authored by one reporter and 3 contributors, promises to reveal the key to the Russia collusion mystery we've all been waiting for nearly 2 years. The article starts. A joint investigation by BuzzFeed News and Partners has uncovered new information that rewrites the story of the fake news boom in the Macedonian town of Veles. A week before Election Day in 2016, BuzzFeed News revealed that young men and teens in Veles were running over 100 websites that pumped out often false viral stories that supported Donald Trump. Media outlets from across the world descended upon Veles to tell the story of how the so-called fake news teens, many of whom had a shaky understanding of English, made large sums of money from digital ads shown next to their misleading stories about U.S. politics. But after reviewing social media posts, government records, domain registry information, and archived version of fake news sites, as well as interviewing key players, BuzzFeed News, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and the Investigative Reporting Lab Macedonia, can now reveal that Veles' political news industry was not started spontaneously by apolitical teens. Rather, it was launched by a well-known Macedonian media attorney, Traice Arsov, who worked closely with two high-profile American partners for at least 6 months during a period that overlapped with Election Day. Of those Americans, Paris Wade is now running for office in Nevada. Arsov also employed other American and British writers, including at least one who currently works for U.S. right-wing conspiracy site The Gateway Pundit. The stereotype of the Macedonian fake news publisher is of a teenager in Venice who knows little English, doesn't care about journalism or U.S. politics, and excels at using spammy techniques to make plagiarized misinformation go viral. Traice Arsov is none of those things, but he is the godfather of U.S. politics sites in the country. Arsov, 33, is a lawyer based in the capital of Skopje who comes from Venice and commonly goes by the nickname Teo. He is a self-described libertarian who counts Republican Senators Rand Paul and Ted Cruz among his political idols. During more than a decade in which Macedonia was ruled by an authoritarian conservative government, he was one of only a few lawyers willing to defend independent journalists. In a twist of fate, a co-author of this story was formerly one of Arsov's clients. Arsov was dropped as counsel after his publishing activities were uncovered during this investigation. The line, quote, "during more than a decade in which Macedonia was ruled by an authoritarian conservative government," end quote, better than any other, gives up the author's partisanship. The truth is that Macedonia has never had a government that was not authoritarian. As part of Yugoslavia between 1945 and 1990, Macedonia was under the rule of the Communist League, which was co-sponsored by Moscow and the West. This was a time of political singularity. Outright police state rule, no freedom of speech or association or political thought, no right to privacy, and very limited right to private property. In 1990, Yugoslavia declared political pluralism, and in 1991, the country fell apart, which proves that it had been held together by force. Yet, despite the adoption of the new constitution that guarantees the right to privacy, private property, and freedom of the market, as well as freedom of speech and association, and the right to a timely and fair trial, the police state went on operating just as it had in the days of the old constitution. It is estimated that between 4,000 and 20,000 Macedonians, mostly of right-leaning political orientation, were persecuted by the secret police throughout the 1990s, secret police being part of the Interior Ministry. This was a period when Macedonia, despite losing at the polls, was governed by the rebranded Communist Party, then as now operating as the Social Democratic Union, or SDSM. In 2000, the first VMRO-DPMNE government voted in a Freedom of Information Act that opened the secret police archives, and that confirmed the people's suspicions that the state security apparatus had been violating the constitutional rights of pro-Western nationalists. The Soros-funded and founded civil societies have yet to write a word on these violations. In fact, the capo di tutti capi of the Soros Foundation in Macedonia, one Vladimir Milchin, a child of the 1968 revolution, testified in front of the Macedonian Constitutional Court in 2009 in favor of those politically motivated violations of the Interior Ministry. The VMRO-DPMNE government of Nikola Gruevski, which ruled Macedonia between 2006 and 2016, did, however, make a move that angered the globalists, as it disrupted their plan of population replacement in Europe. In the midst of the migrant wave of 2015, Macedonia closed its borders to illegal crossers en route to the generosity of Western European welfare states. Now, the BuzzFeed article goes on to say that their crackpot team was able to determine that Arsov, along with his brother Panche, registered the domain name of the first politics site in Veles, usapoliticstoday.com, on September 23, 2015. The Arsovs eventually established their own network of nearly half a dozen sites and associated Facebook pages, which had a total of over 2 million followers, and that operated until the social network site finally took them down in April of this year. We found that the names of the groups where we could stay longer, where our profiles were not removed, were related to conservatives, to Republicans, to Trump. If you found 100 groups for conservatives, you could only find 10 for liberals. The article goes on to say that in the first interview with reporters, Arsov claimed that his site did not publish hoaxes. Rather, they initially ripped content from mainstream conservative sites such as Fox News, Breitbart, and the Daily Caller, and the Washington Examiner. I am against the mainstream media because of its bias to Democrats, CNN, and all others. ABC, they are also biased, says Traice. An examination of archived pages from the now defunct site, however, shows a raft of right-wing conspiracy theories. Obama's ex-boyfriend reveals shocking truth that he wants to hide from America, reads one early article. Putin, to NWO agents and Satan worshippers, I am coming for you, was another, as was huge scandal, Chelsea isn't Bill Clinton's daughter. In at least one instance, the site republishes an article from the satirical website The Onion, presenting it as real news. Oh, those conservative yokels, they're so dumb. The article goes on to say that a number of early stories were also favorable to Russia, though Arsov repeatedly denied in interviews that his publishing business had any connections to Russia or anyone who might have operated as a proxy for the country. He simply used such content because it was readily available. By 2016, Tale Arsov also made an important new contact. He said he began exchanging Facebook messages with Ben Goldman, an American writer and publisher who, along with his partner Paris Wade, had founded Liberty Writers News, a hyper-partisan conservative site based in the United States. The pair would achieve a certain level of infamy after a late November 2016 profile by the Washington Post portrayed them as misinformation merchants who were getting rich by stoking fear and anger. Wade is now a Republican candidate for the Nevada State Assembly. Personally, I have never heard of these people before I read this story. The BuzzFeed article goes on to say, both Arsov and the Americans, Goldman and Wade, initially downplayed their relationship and changed their stories when confronted with new evidence. When first contacted by phone, Wade told a reporter, I don't know anything about collaborating with Macedonian publishers. Goldman, however, eventually issued a written statement that acknowledged the partnership. Arsov initially said he mostly knew about Goldman and Wade from the Washington Post profile. He then said that the only connection was that he had commissioned a small number of articles from Wade's brother Alex. Only after more than 2 weeks of interviews did Arsov disclose their extensive cooperation. Arsov said that Goldman had asked him to help stop other Macedonian publishers from stealing Liberty Writers' content, which he says he did in his capacity as a lawyer by sending letters to Veles site owners. Goldman's statement, however, denies this. We never utilized any of his legal services in any capacity, and the relationship was strictly journalist to journalist. Both Arsov and Goldman said the relationship began when they shared each other's content on their respective Facebook pages and grew from there. Wade eventually wrote more than 40 articles for Arsov's Macedonian site, USA Politics Today, between the summer of 2016 and January 2017. His brother, Alex Wade, also wrote for the site, authoring at least 670 articles using the pseudonym Alexander Warren. Arsov also hired other Americans to work for him. According to the BuzzFeed article, there is now an investigation that is trying to determine the key players behind the sites and whether there was any foreign involvement in their creation and operation. The article also quotes a Clint Watts, a former FBI agent and author of Messing with the Enemy, surviving in a social media world of hackers, terrorists, Russians, and fake news, saying that the investigators are likely focused on whether there is a Russian connection to the creation and operation of the sites, whether their content shows any signs of coordination, and whether they received any outside funding. To me, the biggest is, where did they get the money to start their efforts? I know websites are relatively inexpensive to set up, but the basic infrastructure and know-how must come from somewhere. Where did they get the idea to start a clickbait site with such a deliberate focus on US elections? And who gave them the resources and skills to get off the ground? It would appear that Mr. Watts doesn't watch a lot of YouTube videos or listen to podcasts, since if he did, he would surely have heard of companies like Wix, Bluehost, or Squarespace, all of which offer web hosting and website templates for mere dollars per month. As Arsov mentions in the article, his content originally came directly from websites like Fox News, Breitbart, and the Daily Caller, and later he hired writers living in the United States whose native language was English. And from personal experience, I can tell that those articles don't pay much. It's usually about $20 or so per article. The choice of the U.S. as his target market is simple, given that Macedonia's population is 2 million, with an average annual income of under $5,000, while the U.S. population is 350 million, with an average income 10 times higher. As to the question where Arsov got his idea to start a clickbait website, there are two possibilities. One is he spends time on the internet and sees lots of clickbait titles that prompt him to click on the link. The other possibility includes Arsov's former flatmate, one Sasha Ivanov, former host of the TV show Politico, and currently the proprietor of a number of pro-government clickbait websites. The article then goes into a half-baked attempt at a coup de grace by linking one of the members of the so-called Russian troll factory to the Veles hub. The investigation also reveals that at least one member of Russia's troll factory, who has been indicted by U.S. Special Counsel Robert Mueller for alleged interference in the election, was in Macedonia just 3 weeks before the web domain for the country's first U.S.-focused politics site was registered. Reporters did not find any evidence connecting the Russian Anna Bogacheva to the Veles sites. Arsov denies any links to Russia. But now Macedonian security agencies are cooperating with law enforcement in the United States and at least 2 Western European countries to probe possible links between Russians, U.S. citizens, and the pro-Trump fake news websites, 2 senior Macedonian officials said. One person of interest to investigators is Anna Bogacheva. Bogacheva was one of 13 Russian nationals indicted by Mueller in February over alleged interference in the U.S. election. The indictment focused on the role of the St. Petersburg-based Internet Research Agency, often referred to as a troll factory, which produced online propaganda and spread messages via social media aimed at helping Trump defeating his rival Hillary Clinton. According to the indictment, Bogacheva at one point oversaw a data analysis group for the agency's U.S. operation. Along with another agency employee, Bogacheva allegedly traveled around the United States for about 3 weeks in June 2014, gathering information for an intelligence report that was shared with her superior at the agency. Exactly a year later, she arrived in Macedonia. Immigration reports obtained by reporters show that Bogacheva was in Macedonia in mid-2015, leaving the country by land to Greece on June 26 that year. No record could be found of her entering the country. She must have been teleported. When contacted by reporters via Vkontakte to ask why she was in Macedonia in 2015, Bogacheva said, "Sorry, I'm not discussing my work." She did not respond to subsequent messages. Reporters found no connection between Bogacheva and the Macedonian sites. Can you believe the audacity of these tabloid journalists calling portals like Gateway Pundit conspiracy sites? Here they write an 8-page investigative story by 4 quote-unquote journalists promising to bust open the Russia collusion conspiracy, and all they can deliver is some circumstantial evidence at best. A bunch of guys in a third world country trying to make a few bucks, a couple of low-grade writers that pump out multiple stories a day, and some Russian chick that may or may not have been in the same third world country that the first bunch of guys live in. They have no proof that this Russian lady actually entered Macedonia, and if she did, when that happened. They have not even the shred of evidence that she met or collaborated with Arsov or Goldman or Wade, and they have absolutely no evidence to prove any coordination of the Veles hub with the Russian intelligence agency or with the Trump campaign. Can you believe someone is actually paying real money for these clowns to produce this garbage? No wonder half the West is a bunch of screeching lunatics yelling at the sky, looking for a safe space where they can cuddle teddy bears. The left-leaning Soros-friendly media, and this includes formerly reputable companies like Deutsche Welle and Voice of America, have recently been bending over backwards to represent the Macedonian nationalists who are unwilling to give up their identity as anti-Western pro-Russian elements in bed with Putin and his effort to undermine the Western democracy. The irony is that the Macedonian nationalists have traditionally been pro-Western and have only lately become disheartened by the goings-on in the EU and the American State Department. At the same time, Macedonian dissidents like myself who live in the West are aware that Macedonia simply has not earned its place in the EU and NATO. In fact, we know that the changing of the country's name will not suffice, as there are more substantial issues relating to the rule of law and economic freedom and stability that will act as further obstacles to Macedonia's entry into the Western alliances. Personally, as a Canadian citizen, I would not like to see a corrupt, undemocratic country like Macedonia enter NATO, since one rotten apple spoils the bunch. Those pushing for the accession of Macedonia and other Balkan countries into the EU prior to them undertaking genuine societal reforms don't wish these organizations well. The left-leaning media narrative regarding Macedonia has been directed at smearing and discrediting the legitimate opposition to the name change agreement, as well as to further drive the abjectly unsubstantiated Russia collusion narrative in America. The fact that the Soros Party has to depend on rags like BuzzFeed to keep the hoax alive shows just how desperate they are. Anyone familiar with the writings of Pat Buchanan, Ann Coulter, and their ilk will recognize that Donald Trump's victory in 2016 did not come as a result of the proliferation of clickbait websites from a Macedonian backwater town, but as the result of 2 decades of misguided policies on trade and immigration. Anyone familiar with Macedonian history will recognize that Russian-born Greek oligarchs don't need to spend $300,000 in order to make a deal forcing Macedonians to give up their identity, unpopular with the people. Thank you for watching. My name is Dusan Petrovsky, and this has been a production of the Macedonian Information Center in cooperation with the Committee for the Democratization of the Republic of Macedonia, both based in Ontario, Canada. For more information concerning our activities or to donate to our cause, please visit our website at macedonianinformationcenter.org, center spelled the Canadian way. Or you can follow me on Twitter at Sovereign Spiro.